Okay, good morning. I'm Stuart Foster, CEO of Recoup, and welcome to the third in our series of plastic recycling resource webinars. This one is focused on the opportunities and challenges within the horticulture and gardening sectors. Before we get started, just to confirm that only our speakers and chair have access to their web camera and microphone. We have a fantastic set of speakers lined up for you today. If you've got any questions, please do use the Q&A function, which can be found in the menu. I think it's at the bottom of the screen, at least if you're using a PC or a laptop. These will be used by our chair for the panel questions. We'll prepare a short document for any questions we're not able to cover, given the time we've got, which will be circulated. I believe they'll be shared via our regular industry updates alongside our other information reports and industry news. You do need to be registered to receive those. So if you don't already receive our industry updates, just drop a quick email to inquiry@recoup.org and ask to be added to the circulation list. Please don't use the chat function or virtually raise your hand, as we won't be monitoring during the session. The webinar is also being recorded, and all delegates will receive a link to that recording and the slides after the event. To remind speakers, the slides are controlled by Recoup, and please do mute your microphones whilst others are presenting. So the horticulture and gardening sector goes hand in hand with resource efficiency and sustainability, but there is a lot of work still to be done in this space. There's a whole range of plastic products in this sector that have provided end markets for recycled plastics for a long time now. But there's so much more focus and interest in plastics, it's just as important to consider what happens across the whole value chain and how we align both industry and consumer responsibilities, whether it's for short life packaging, long life furniture, or anything in between. Like these. As Recoup, we've existed for 30 years now, and we have aims that align very closely with this. We've got three key pillars to our work, including strategy and policy, project and research, and education and engagement, which are delivered through the support of our members to deliver the aims, as you can see on the screen. Those are both business, consumer, and environmental aims. Last year, we're also very pleased to announce that Adam Frost became a patron of the organisation, taking over from the late David Bellamy. This again has strengthened our desire to do more in your sectors and engage with the relevant trade bodies and companies to get the support we need to deliver on the opportunities that exist. Clearly, from the quote you can see there from Adam, he agrees that we all need to do our bit. Slide, please. So Recoup do a lot of work in this space across plastic resources and recycling, too much to mention today. A lot of the information is available on our website. I thought I'd just signpost you to a few of them. So, for example, we have a range of technical reports come out looking at things like plastic collections in the UK. We first did that report in 1994, so it does tell a very good story of the development over that time. We track things like the infrastructure for plastic reprocessing. We look at things like COVID, and certainly, like many others, we've reviewed the impact of COVID-19 and produced a report to outline how it's impacted across that whole plastic value and recycling chain. Of course, we also respond to government consultations, the latest of which was the plastic packaging tax, which was an interesting opportunity and challenge, and I'm sure we'll hear more about that in due course as the government review the responses. And we also produce things like case studies, and I've included a picture there, just the front cover of our DIY and gardening case studies, which are particularly relevant for today. We also do a lot with the consumer. So Pledge to Recycle Plastics is the brand that we use for all the consumer engagement pieces. But actually, if you don't already engage with us on things like Twitter, please do, because you'll see the Don't Throw on the Go campaigns and Stop It, Don't Drop It campaigns. And the more support we get for that, hopefully can engage the consumer with the kind of messages we need around reducing environmental impact and making the most of our resources. And again, there are technical reports around consumer behaviour as well. But looking at what goes into the system is equally as important. So for many years, we've had guidance that's actually used by producers, manufacturers, brands, retailers to understand the journey of their packaging through the system and the journey of their products through the system. Can it be recycled, and actually how they can improve recyclability. To take that one step further, we now also have certification of recyclability as well. The European platform Recyclas, we are the UK auditors, and that's specifically for plastic packaging, so we can actually rubber stamp the guidance that we give to show you whether it's recycled. And of course, we have an ongoing relationship with OPRL, the pack labelling scheme as well. And there's lots of other things we do around product and packaging within the sectors that relate to horti and gardening. For example, the green piece of plastic there is actually recycled artificial turf, and we were looking a few years back at whether technically we could do that at scale. You can also see there some bags, which is actually recycled waterproof membrane. We helped set up a system originally for the construction sector, but that was being used to turn into piping. And even Adam Frost himself, when we first spoke to him, one of his issues was he had a lot of plant pots sitting there that he wanted to do something with, but couldn't put them in the local recycling schemes. So we actually took those pots away for him and turned them into car automotive parts. So Adam Frost plant pots are now running around somewhere in a car. So next slide, please. As I mentioned, this is a set of webinars, and this is the third, but there are still more to come. So if you have interest in other sectors as well, around reuse and refill schemes, farming, and actually we have a very nice seminar on with global strategies as well, and there will be more to follow, so watch this space. So which approach is right based on the evidence and information available? Are the current recycling systems viable for horti and gardening sectors, not just in environmental terms, business terms too? And what infrastructure changes might we need to see in the short and longer term? The roles of reducing reuse and refill and recycling are still up for discussion. Legislation and policy is going to have a big role to play, as is extending producer responsibility. But as a sector, I think taking the lead, being proactive in this space and actually showing a coherent strategy and actions at scale must be the aim. Make the most of the time we have. I'm actually going to stop there and leave you in the capable hands of James Clark, Director of Policy and Communications at the HTA and our chair for today. Over to you, James.
Thanks, Stuart. And thank you for that introduction. And good morning, everyone. Welcome to this series of Recoup webinars. It's a bit odd being on, well, I suppose it's the new normal really, isn't it? It's this new normal of meetings virtually. But welcome, and yes, it's a shame we can't all be together, but we are together virtually, and we have 130, I think, together with us today. So welcome to you all. Just a quick little bit about HTA. For those who don't know, the Horticultural Trades Association has 1,500 members. It represents across the whole of the garden industry supply chain. So that's from suppliers to growers, the nursery level, garden centres, garden industry manufacturers, and domestic landscapers. So the HTA is quite unique in that it covers the almost the whole of the garden industry supply chain. Overall, the horticulture sector is worth about £24 billion a year in GDP to the UK, with about 560,000 jobs dependent on it. Last year, UK households spent about £6.3 billion on garden goods. So the British love affair of the garden is alive and well. Within that, 1.5 billion of that is on plants. But like all sectors, the garden industry was badly hit by COVID, with growers unable to get their stock to market, and garden centres having to close. However, through HTA lobbying and wider industry lobbying, we were able to be the first sector to reopen after COVID. And we've seen sales bounce back and exceed month by month last year's. So announced today that garden product sales are up 34% in June, 17% up in July, and 19% up in August. And why that's important is because we've seen about 3 million new gardeners come through as a result of COVID. There is that pent-up demand. You know, I think anecdotally, everyone's probably spoken to someone who said during COVID they've been out in the garden a bit more, getting a bit more sort of grow your own, and that is really showing through in the figures. The confidence that people have in going to garden centres as well now is still high, and it's high versus other sectors. So it is a sector that consumers feel confident in shopping and being in. We know that gardeners are environmentally conscious. They are. I think, you know, various surveys have shown, our own surveys, various surveys by others have shown that higher than other parts of the population. So this is a very topical and very pertinent issue that we're discussing today for consumers. And you know, plastics is right up there, you know, at the commercial level, but also at that consumer level, in terms of plant pots, green waste, bags and film, and bottle container recycling is all there. And so, mentioning all those things, I'm delighted that we have speakers that can cover all those things today. And so we've got some really, as Stuart said, we've got some really good speakers today, and I'm really pleased that John Twitchen from AMY, the Waste Management Division, is joining us today. Michael Nordholm, have I pronounced that right, Michael? I'm sorry if I got that wrong.
It's called Nordlo. It's a typical Northern Germany pronunciation, quite strange for others.
Okay, thank you. But I'm delighted you are with us today from Popperman on the plant pot side of things. Julia Shifter from TIPA, who's going to be talking about compostable packaging. And Jane Hartley from Evergreen Garden Care, who has some well-known brands, consumer brands out there. We'll be talking about some of the consumer engagement and attitudes. So really pleased that they're with us. We're going to be 15 minutes per speaker, I think. We've got time for questions as well at the end, depending on what questions come through, and some of the presentations might be able to take some questions directly after some of the presentations, one or two. But we do have time for questions at the end. As Stuart said, all the questions will be answered either on the day or as a follow-up. So don't worry if your question's not picked today, they will get answered. But I know on a housekeeping matter, Anne tells me we have to finish very promptly at 11:45. So let's keep it tight, let's keep it punchy, and let's make it for 11:45. I think my job now is to hand over to John. I think, John, you're first up. And so the floor is yours. I think you've got 15 minutes.
Thank you very much. Thanks, James. And thanks everybody else. New normal, new extended normal potentially, but we're making it work, aren't we? So thank you very much for inviting me to speak today. As James has said, I'm with AMY, External Relations in the Waste Treatment Division. AMY has 4 strategic waste treatment facilities across the country, and pretty much operating almost every conceivable technology that works, and that includes anaerobic digestion and in-vessel composting, which I'll touch on in a bit. Expertise in everything from collections through to end product, and not least of which is the soil improver that you see, well, the start of its journey, or the midpoint of its journey probably, where it's being loaded and shredded in the picture here in the background. We along the way have worked with Recoup, not particularly in horticulture or the organics sector, but particularly in relation to recycling and separating out polymers, colours, etc. We run trials through a recycling facility for them, and I was asked to talk about all and sundry. So almost all the points James touched on there in his introduction, I'm going to be touching on in a bit more detail. But just to give you an idea, sources of the things we're handling, whether you call it green garden waste or food waste or other recyclable materials, it's from homes collected from households and businesses, from household recycling centres where people bring material along, from gardeners, from municipal gardens, and from commercial as well as domestic. So a really wide range of materials, particularly in that organic space. And so I suppose there's two lenses to look at this from. One is plastics, particularly given Recoup's interest, but also organics and organic products, and the importance of those two things being kept separate and not mixing. So if we could go on to the next slide, please. Recoup in the background. Thank you. So I've just set out here not exactly the questions and the answers, but kind of. So some of the challenges are polymers and colours, the compostable material and biodegradability we'll touch on. I know other speakers will cover that in more detail and more expertise. And then particularly thinking about consumers and confusion and information and so on. And then I'll touch on some of the solutions or some of the challenges, if you like, that need to be solved. So producer responsibility, I think it's fair to say that's a really important issue. Circular economy and definite opportunities there, which again other speakers will touch on, and consumer engagement. So if we could just whiz on to the next slide, please. So this isn't by any means a summary of everything that sort of is important or the only issues, but others have touched on already, talked about pots. I think Stuart in introductions regarding Adam Frost was talking about a large number of pots. I don't think they're his pots, but there's certainly a large number there. And what you can see is, some of you are familiar, I appreciate, with recycling, others less so, but what you can see there are probably 2 or 3 different polymers, certainly 3, maybe more different colors, shapes and sizes. So you've got a white one's probably a paint pot actually down there. You've got terracotta colored ones, and you've obviously got black and gray. Now, the color of polymers is a particular challenge, especially if they're in a recycling mix coming at a recycling facility. So part of it is the size and the rigidity or the polymer, but the main challenge that we face in a sort of round structure like that is actually the color. So just for those that are unfamiliar, in most recycling facilities, materials find their way through a system based on their weight and their shape. So these are fairly light and fairly round, so they end up in a certain place, which is amazing. And if you haven't, you should go and definitely have a look at a recycling facility as soon as they're able to take visitors again, because it is quite incredible what is achieved. But one of the major challenges is a black plastic pot, could be yogurt, could be plant pots, whizzing along at a very high speed, is not identifiable with a near-infrared identifier. It just looks like the conveyor belt underneath it, so it drops off the end. So that's something that I'd recommend anyone understands more about. Obviously, if you're taking them back to a specific place, like a garden centre, it's much easier to source segregate, and then you've got fewer issues. And maybe that's part of the solution. We'll touch on that later. The other major challenge, not sort of summarised particularly here, would be bags of products in horticultural sector, for example. So when I was a child, I used to help my dad, who was a landscape gardener, still is, clearing gardens, cutting grass, and bagging up the organic waste that we were collecting, taking that for composting. And we would used to use old horticultural product bags, topsoil or dressings or peats or whatever, and that would keep the van clean. It's all very good. Obviously there's only so many bags you can use like that, and then we got a tipper and we didn't really need bags anymore, and it's not exactly the long-term solution, but just to make a point really that reuse and prevention as well are really important challenges here. And films and black plastic polymers are not just special to horticulture, they are a challenge all the way across waste and resource management. So much wider issues. So I think the other major challenge there is keeping plastics out of the natural environment, and certainly out of organic end products, which I think is important from a horticultural perspective in terms of growing and using those materials and replacing other products, whether they're fertilizers or peat, that are more damaging. So I've put up a couple of examples of food waste collections there. So one is a kitchen caddy, and you can see there's a liner in the caddy, and the other is a very attractive looking pile of food waste, mainly contained in what are probably mostly biodegradable compostable bags. Now, the issue with that, one of the major challenges there, just moving on to compostable and biodegradable challenges, is when it arrives, do you know for sure it's a compostable or biodegradable plastic bag? So most, certainly AD facilities are where there's a clean input and a clean output, almost certainly going to have some method of removing plastic, whether it's packaging where food's been perished and been delivered and needs to be extracted from packaging, or just regular food collections. So the issue there is that, you know, you assume it might not be, and therefore you remove it. So a lot of those bags aren't actually composted, but obviously if a fragment does end up in the end product, it will biodegrade. So I think there's always a debate around that. But one of the benefits there, and therefore one of the challenges, is that using liners like that actually increases participation and capture in food waste collection schemes. So, you know, just using that as an example, we will end up with biodegradable or compostable plastics. But I think the challenge we've got is do we want, and should we go down a wider route like that, where it sort of feels guilt-free or less guilty, you know, and so are people then going to remodify their behavior and not worry quite so much about putting it in the right bin, if it's a plate or a cup? So that's my major issue there. Just to briefly touch on, I'm sort of about halfway through, so that's about right. I'm doing quite well there. It's unusual for me. Tea bags were featured on the BBC only last night, an article last night. I think they were on Hugh's War on Plastic, certainly recently, if not this week. And they tested the 6, I think it is, leading brands for how biodegradable they are, how much plastic there might be in them. And that's something that I know a lot of people have been talking about for quite some time. You know, diligently we put our tea bags, or a lot of people do, in the composting, in the food waste collection. And I think, you know, I'm happy to talk about that in more detail. I don't have any stats and facts other than observed, but it certainly is an important issue. And I know that a lot of brands are going back, because we used to be there, they're going back to fully biodegradable tea bags, which is a positive. So just briefly then on consumers, I think, you know, the how, where and what to do with whether it's a black plastic plant pot or food waste or whatever, green garden waste, it is the major challenge, whether that's a person in the business or a person in a home. And then, you know, for example, green waste or garden waste, I think we all probably know what that means, but does it mean green garden furniture? Does it mean astroturf? Well, to some it looks like it does, which obviously creates a bit of a challenge. At least they're quite large and you can work them out. But even green garden waste needs explaining. And then prevention, reduction and reuse, there's a bit of a lack, I think, of focus around that. It's symptomatic of all aspects of society, but it's something that we, I think, as custodians and guardians of the natural environment, probably the front line, many of you on the call today in various ways, you know, I think we have a real responsibility around that, which brings us to responsibility, and who ultimately is responsible. If we go on to the next slide, and then I'll round out in the last 4 or 5 minutes. So again, these are not the only solutions, and certainly I think an aero packet, you know, filled with soil with some seedlings growing out of it is brilliant. It's really resourceful. It's certainly massively extended the useful life of a packet of aeros, which would probably last about 3 minutes in my hands in their natural form, with chocolate in. But obviously that's not a very long-term solution. I think the issue there is the packaging in the first place. But just to give you an example of the resourcefulness of some, this isn't to summarize all solutions, but I think very interesting bunch of pots over there. This is on I think this was on a local sale place, you know, Facebook thing, but 15 quid for some used pots. Now I know there's some very important issues around plant health, disease and so on, but I've read plenty of blogs with people reusing their pots, which is fabulous. Obviously, some garden centres run take-back schemes, which is great. We've still got to make sure that those products, those pots in this case, are recycled, whether that's back into another pot, mechanical, or increasingly chemical recycling, which definitely would deal with all of the other concerns you might have around reuse or recycling. That for me, moving on to sort of circular economy, I suppose, is definitely a huge opportunity, but it's reliant on infrastructure. But more than just infrastructure, it's reliant on specifications. So manufacturers and retailers and resellers wanting that product, wanting that that stamp of environmental responsibility, if you like. So I think that's one probably to pick up in discussion. The Koya plant pot or organic alternative, I really like that. I'm sure there's experts on the line who would disagree, but I really like it from a sort of communication perspective. It says exactly what it does. Even the little tag in there, one of the questions Anne Hitch from Recoup had asked me is how many little plastic name tags do we see in green garden waste? And the answer is many, but I think they're even made out of wood, which is helpful. And then obviously the one area of direct consumer responsibility is around food waste. As much as we might blame a supermarket for a buy one get one free offer that's too good to refuse, ultimately it's the consumer at the end, or the kitchen preparing food waste in a business sense, that is responsible for that food waste, and making the most of the food that they buy. Cooking from fresh obviously is great. You end up with peelings, but a lot less packaging, and probably healthier food, better for you. But in terms of the circular economy, we've been working on a local circular economy project, which is a mechanical process, but taking PET that's collected locally, is processed locally back into new food contact packaging PET, and back on the shelves in a period of probably days, if not weeks. It's quite a significantly brilliant, I think, project, and all local. It just so happens the stars aligned, but you've got to make these things happen. And the last point, really, just to round out, 30 seconds, I think, Chair. I'm as surprised as you are. This is a really important issue. Consumer engagement is at the heart of it. Everyone has a role. Everyone has to care. And if you don't care, then I reckon you'll probably be taxed into caring, or at least acting. So I'll round out there, if that's okay, and hand back to you. There's just one more slide that says thank you. Thank you.
That's great. Thanks, John. There's a good tour de force of the range of issues there. I've made a note of a number of them, and and thank you. That's been very helpful. I think there's a couple of questions that's just come in. I know there's some quite for this section. So I think if we can give a very quick answer to this question. So it's from Sean at Modiform, and he said they found that pots over 3 litre capacities, that's 19 centimetre top diameter, didn't get recycled because they were too heavy or too big to be blown into the recycling section. And I suppose as a waste management company, what's your sort of experience of this, and how is this the case for you?
Simple answer is yes. Same with paint pots, and also they might be clean, but they are still heavy. They're quite big, so yeah, they might not fit all the way through to that point, and they certainly probably would be too heavy to be blown over into. It's a jet of air that it's like food technology where you pick out discoloured grains of rice, for example. It's the same sort of technology, but a very precise jet of air that pushes typically a plastic bottle or a pot into a certain bunker. And obviously if it does identify the polymer or the colour, but it's too heavy, it will just drop into rejects or drop into the wrong place. So absolutely right. And the other question I can see there from Jane Lawler, many collection bins, recycling bins, Kerbside Collection say no plant pots, thank you. Yeah, absolutely, that's often the case. I think a survey was done recently. It may well have been something Recoup was involved with, and one of the gardening magazines, I think, actually. Yeah, it's colour, it's confusion, it's size, it's all those issues. and almost certainly some will have had issues with contamination, soil, and so on as well. So yeah, the targeted materials are the ones that are more widely available and recycled, and that's often the reason, Jane.
Great, lovely, thanks. I think just on that, actually, I know on the sort of the colours, and I know Michael, I won't take Michael's thunder too much, and he's up next. Is at the HGA, you know, our members got together and moved away from black pots to a taupe-coloured pot to make it more recyclable. And before COVID, we had a campaign around encouraging local authorities to collect plant pots. But again, maybe we'll pick that up a bit later on in the discussion, because I'm keen to hand over now to Michael from Poppelman, and who's going to be speaking exactly what we've just been talking about, which is on plant pots.
Yeah, thank you very much, James, for the introduction, and also thanks for inviting us. It's my big pleasure to, definitely talk also about the producer's responsibility, since this is a big topic, but I would like to tell you that that's not the topic at all, and which I would like to present you a bit later on. I would say welcome to everybody. Thanks for listening. I'm definitely, as I said, happy to be here. But as you can imagine, working for a plastic manufacturing company currently is quite challenging. Every day you will be confronted with marine littering, with dying animal pictures, whales full of plastic inside. But apart from that, I'm currently very proud to work for a plastic manufacturing company. And I definitely can announce that I'm pleased to have a mutual tour through the versatile and valuable world of plastics, and to also present you what kind of fantastic solution plastic offers. And there is my add-on: if you treat it properly, and again to what John earlier said, if you treat it with responsibility. What do plastic and horticulture have to do with each other? I mean, to be honest, more than I've ever believed, it's not about plastic in the environment or plastic in our nature. Thinking about plastic plant pots as a packaging and growing medium for plants, which is quite efficient. They grow finally our plants, which let our nature finally be a nature. The next 15 minutes, if you just could skip to the next slide. I would like to talk with you about a short introduction of the company, of what we finally do. Later on, I will talk about the responsibility, about what sustainability means for us, and especially about the challenges and opportunities in the horticulture industry. For sure, that's a topic where I could talk about for hours, but I will just give you a small excerpt about certain participations of the supply chain, because it's, in our eyes, it's the entire supply chain that has to work together, and we are happy to contribute and be part of that supply chain and finally shape our mutual future. After I've talked about the challenges and opportunities, I would like to round everything up with a kind of final claim and conclusion. That's where we are. So if you just could skip to the next slide, please. Thanks a lot. So Peppermann is a German-based plastic manufacturer. We have more than 2,700 employees worldwide, and we're exporting in more or less 90 countries worldwide, predominantly producing plastic products. And we have 4 divisions, and the next slide will show you our most important division, which is the TQ division. I just need to skip and show the next slide. Yes, thank you very much. Yes, thanks. So as you can see, Peppermann is, with this TQ division, manufacturing plastic plant pots. We are manufacturing plastic trays, all for horticultural purposes. And the last decades of Peppermann, especially in the TQ division, were characterized by many changes, by improvements, and all with the intention to hit the state-of-the-art sustainability. So we were moving from injection molded pots to lightweight thermoform pots. We were moving from, let's say, bigger pots to optimized diameter pots. And last but not least, we have kind of introduced eco-design manufacturing where we also use and increase the proportion of recycled material in our products. So our current product range is particularly striving for circular economy, as you can see. So we are aiming at 100% post-consumer recycled, still offering some black pots because some important markets are still asking for that, but having shifted our range to 75% recyclable plant pots. And that's not our final target at all. We are now fully striving for circular economy. The next slide, if you just could continue, thank you. I would like to express our motivation, our drive. Our drive, finally, as a manufacturer for horticultural products, our drive, so to say, is the environment that we work for. So we are producing parts for gardeners, for the nature. So what we would like to see are stunning gardens full of flowering plants, blooming spots, and finally green relax oases around ourselves. But initially said, plastic manufacturers are currently facing big challenges. The entire plastic is bad discussion, or the war on plastics, brings us into a position where it's sometimes very difficult to justify why plastic is so valuable. You see oceans full of plastics, countrysides polluted with plastic PET bottles. But come on, honestly, it's not about the plastic material itself, it's about the treatment, the final treatment, and the responsibility the society has finally, and how the society handles plastics finally. And as you can imagine, it's quite frustrating once you know the material is quite valuable, versatile, flexible, durable, etc. So one of the most efficient materials in the world, once it is treated properly. So here again, it's all about responsibility and working together. And according to the general awareness should lead to a more positive picture of plastics, whilst we need to talk about opportunities, about responsibility, infrastructure, and finally the entire treatment of plastics. And the biggest challenge currently is the merge of expectations our society has with real solutions that improve our world and that enable an efficient life as well as sustainable life. Especially in terms of greenwashing, there are so many greenwashing solutions around us which give, or where people assume that it may be recyclable, and people know that a lot of companies are doing just greenwashing, and that opens a lot of skepticism. People have doubts to handle plastics, etc. So that's one of our biggest challenges, since the people doubt to handle plastics. But it's again also a big levy for us then to convince them about the opportunities. But it's not that, it's also the missing alternatives. If I think about alternatives currently being discussed, most of the alternatives are not much better than plastics, or in most cases they are worse than plastics, because we all have to grasp the entire picture. But here again, we all have to say that we have to use as less plastics as possible, but as often as it is necessary and is used efficient and with a certain character of responsibility. As I said, such a valuable raw material that offers so many advantages, and that's why plastic is quite important for us. It's durable. For us, it sometimes extends the product life, and the key is that we have to find a solution which is in kind of based on reduction, on reuse plastics, and on optimize the recycling of plastics. These three pillars, if you just could go to the next slide, it shows exactly what our eco-designs is striving for. Eco-design is our major task for resource-saving solutions, and we want to reduce plastics definitely as often as possible. But we still want to use it where necessary, where we still can use it in a kind of efficient way. So weight reduction is a topic, reusable trays, deposit schemes, and for the recycling, definitely our opportunity is the circular economy, as mentioned by John earlier that day. But this will not work alone. So I just need the next slide for my presentation to, thank you. This will not work alone. So there are much more participants in the supply chain, and we all have to work together. That's the gardener, that's the manufacturer for sure, that's the recovery facilities, it's the end consumer, and finally it's politics, it's organizations like Recoup, it's local authorities. We all have to work together because a manufacturer cannot produce more sustainable products, for example, if the raw material is not available. Plastic cannot be recycled if the infrastructure is missing. So what we can see, we are all sitting in the same boat. We just have to work together, and we have to grasp the entire picture always and not just focus on one participant of the supply chain. And in the next minutes, I would like to give you an idea and a certain excerpt of the participants and where the opportunities and challenges are. And therefore, I need the next slide to talk about the gardener. The gardener, in our eyes, is a company, or it's a person who contributes positively to their own horticultural environment by using more sustainable products. The challenge we have is the missing education. The gardener sometimes doesn't know what recyclability means, that it's not only about being detectable, but that it also has to fulfill a certain density, or that we need the recycling infrastructure. Gardeners are influenced by the plastic is bad discussion. And finally, they sometimes do the kind of box ticking. If somebody is asking for non-black pots, I will offer non-black pots. Whereas he could offer him by far more sustainable products like PCR material or recyclable pots. And the opportunities we have then is definitely to talk clear, transparent, and to educate everybody. We need to arouse interest in genuine recyclability. So from the product side or quality side, there is no doubt. So that's why we still can turn the challenges into opportunities. The next slide will show how material recovery do influence our all business. Material recovery facilities have the challenge that they can't sort black packaging. So why don't we have solutions for black packaging? That's one of the important questions I got most frequently asked. Then there is polystyrene, which is very often considered as not valuable, whereas it can be valuable if we are asking for that. So the demand for PCR material is a challenge. But here again, the opportunities are stronger if we kind of create a symbiosis between dual recovery systems, like we have in Germany with der grüne Punkt, the green dot, for example. We need certain incentives to make recycled raw material cheaper than virgin plastic. And last but not least, there are capacities. We need the capacities to do that. I know in UK there are the capacities, but there is a topic, plastic plant pots so far are not allowed to be put into the bin at home. So that's another topic again, which influences our thing, but it's a challenge once it will be allowed. The next slide shows the Kerbside Collection, the infrastructure itself. So the challenge is that in a way we also need governmental support, since in UK, for example, you have different local authorities, and every local authority has different guidelines for recyclability. Why? I mean, in Germany, every county or every state has uniform rules. So it is by far simpler than having different rules for every state. It makes life by far more easier. Everybody knows what to put in. So we can turn this challenge into an opportunity if we consider, for example, plant pots, which is household waste, as being recyclable. So allow it to put it into the bin. The cleaning of the products in most cases happens anyway. And finally, the example, der grüne Punkt, shows how it works. So you just have opportunities which are by far higher and better than the challenges. But we need support from the government, and we need the demand for that. But I know and realize that the demand is currently available. The next and last slide of our participants of the supply chain is the end consumer. The end consumer is longing for more sustainability products. But on the other hand, he's confronted with greenwashing. There is a jungle of certificates. Nobody knows where all the different certificates stand for, what they are about. There is the war on plastics. But the opportunities is that plastic is flexible, that plastic is versatile, and we just need to communicate honest, transparent, and clear. So once we educate them, people are willing to pay more for a recyclable product. We just need to transfer the message also to the retail, since they are also a big leverage. The next slide, if you just could go ahead, thank you, shows that also the politics, the legislation is part of the supply chain. Just some examples which I gained from a recent Recoup or Flora Daily documentations and reports. As I said, 90% of the UK local authorities do not accept plastic plant pots. To meet the target of 30% recycled content, we need to increase the reprocessing capacity by 100%. So these are just a few examples that show that also the politicians need to be involved. We need to create a framework. We need to create an infrastructure. And we are all, and that's why we're here, longing for that and heading towards that, which I definitely appreciate. And that's why I think such a event is very helpful for us. And we're coming from, if you just go to the next second last slide, please, thanks. We're coming from non-black discussions. We have made a fantastic development over the years, from non-black discussions over carbon-free, taupe is the new black. We were talking about detectability. And currently we are talking about real recyclability. But what the future offers us by far more. We could talk about recycled content. We could get rid of post-industrial recycled plastics and use more post-consumer recycled plastics. Household waste is a topic, ending up in circular economy. It's still a long and bumpy road, but we just need to accept the revolution. So the evolution of plastic discussion that should lead to a revolution of processes within our entire supply chain. And my final claim is on the next and last slide, where I definitely would show what the plastic industry needs to do. We all need to strive for a circular economy. That should be our utmost target. And such a circular economy only works if the entire supply chain works together. We need transparent communication, sustainable promotion, and heeding for circular economy. That involves politicians, a forward thinking of everybody. And we need to rethink our own behavior and act more responsible than we have done in the past. So talking about certifications, avoid greenwashing, honesty, transparency, clarity. Education is very important, and we need to set the infrastructure, and that's why we all have to work together. And yeah, with these last words, I definitely thank you very much for listening. The next slide gives you an insight into my contact details. So once there are questions afterwards, I'm definitely happy to answer it. And so I have to say thank you very much, and I'm happy to discuss more sustainable approaches with you. Thank you.
Michael, many thanks. That was a great range of issues there. I think particularly on, I think what I captured was manufacturing innovation. I think the huge challenge of global pricing. I think virgin versus recycled.
Yep.
Recycling systems and capacity. And yeah, I think some of those, how do we be a bit more aggressive, a bit more sort of looking over the brow of the hill of some of those things? How can we really push the agenda? So thank you. That was very helpful. We've got a couple of questions coming up. I'm just conscious that we've got two other speakers, so we'll take some questions a bit later on if we can. Next up is Julia Shifter from TIPA. I'll hand straight over to her. So I think she can do her own introductions and explain a bit about what she's going to be talking about. Thanks, Julia.
Hi, good morning, everyone, and I'm very happy to be part of the webinar today. I think whereas Michael was focusing on rigid, we will focus on flexibles in the next 15 minutes and focus more so on the role of compostable packaging in the evolving new plastic economy. If you can move to the next slide. At TIPA, we focus on a particular segment in packaging, flexibles or the films, how they were referred by John earlier on. actually over 40% of consumer goods are packaged in a flexible plastic packaging. In the UK, by 2025, that stream will amount to 1 million tons, whereby we do have challenges. If we can move to the next slide, unlike ridges that in many cases can be recycled, and if we can move to the next slide, flexibles have a whole different route on their end of life. And the numbers for the UK are ones that are really reflecting the majority of the world, if not much lower numbers in certain countries. And the reason being is that flexible inherently are much less suitable, let's say, for mechanical recycling for many, many reasons. It could be multi-materials like the potato chip that we've seen before, where too many polymers are blended together, therefore not recyclable. It could be because the economics behind recycling very thin films are non-existent, to very limited secondary markets, because you do get a very poor quality polymer if you recycle that thin film. So if we can move to the next slide, and again, talking about the challenges of plastics, actually the #1 plastic contamination in the oceans is coming from flexible plastic. And with the reason, one of the reasons being is that if there was a value, economic value or other, to collect those flexibles, they would probably not end so much in the oceans. And as it is today, at least half of the 11 million tons of plastic poured into the oceans every year is derived from flexibles. So can we do things better in this new changing reality? If we can move to the next slide. For TIPA, I mean, TIPA has been around for over almost 10 years. And the vision for us was always, can we look at this segment of flexibles, and in particular packaging, and ask if we can still provide the functionality that a packaging has, but use materials that are not, in a sense, so robust and undestructible as plastic is, but use other polymers that are more delicate and basically behave like an organic matter, so that at the end of life, they will have the same route and basically return back to nature once consumed. If we can move to the next slide, please. So this is some samples of the products that we do. Our main focus as an industry is actually on the food packaging. That's over 70% of flexibles are in the food sector, so main component in our sales. But we do service some of the gardening industry, etc., with conical bags, for example. For example, Aldi in Ireland is using our bags for their plants. So this is an example of what can be done. If we can move to the next slide. What I really want to talk or focus on in the last part of the conversation is how can compostables integrate with the existing and future waste treatment streams. There are some countries around the world where compostable packaging are already admitted into food waste bins, but this is not yet the case so much in the UK, and this would be the focus on the next few slides. If we can move to the next one, please. So if you want to talk about, integrating with existing or upcoming infrastructure, you want to start with collection. Compostable packaging are actually designed to be collected and treated among food waste. And as you, I'm sure, all know, by the end of 2023, it will be mandatory not only across England, but across the European Union to collect food waste from every single household. So we already have some food collection going on in the UK, but in particular, that will be established by the end of 2023. If we can move to the next slide. There are actually already 52 authorized composting plants in the UK that are handling food waste, and at least 20% of them are already accepting compostables, and has been doing that for actually a few years now. So this practice actually exists already in the UK, though many are not aware of that. If we can move to the next slide. Also, one of the questions and again, the misinformation about compostables is, are they affecting the compost quality? Are they bringing negatives? Are they useful? Are they bringing nutrients? What is the value of compostables when you eventually look at the compost quality? This is a study that was conducted in the US where up to 30% compostable packaging were included in the food waste stream, and showcasing that there's actually zero effect on the quality of compost, and you could still get an A-grade compost. So again, a lot of this information is unknown, and a lot of questions are asked a lot of times with compost facilities. What, does it bring value? Will it affect our recycling? And the answer is no. Next slide, please. One other venue, which I think is important specifically in the UK, because in the UK we see a lot of focus on home composting. A lot of people have gardens, and a lot of them have composters. I think 80% of the residents in the UK have an access to a private garden, and at least a third of them already have a composter at home. And over 70% of local authorities are actually actively promoting home composting as, in a sense, the most ecological way to get rid of your food waste, and now also your packaging, rather than being collected, driven somewhere, and being composted somewhere else. This is something you could do at home with so much less environmental impact. And so again, the gardening industry, compostables, just seems a very interesting match. And you can see here our packages are decomposed within 32 days in a home composter. Next slide, please. So what a value can we bring to this evolving new plastic economy that we're all part of, specifically in the UK? So the Plastic Pact has been signed, which I think everybody is aware that 100% of plastic packages should be reusable, recyclable, or compostable. But not only that, 70% should be effectively recycled or composted. So in a sense, we have that entry point in which compostables should be now also treated, and not just not just the technology itself, but actually be composted. And here's another study that was conducted just a few months ago with 98% of the MPs in the UK thinking that compostable packaging are actually part of the solution for the plastic crisis. Next slide, please. If you look at the challenge from a local authority point of view, if you divert your waste via compost or an AD plant versus landfilling that non-recyclable plastic or incinerating it, you'll be actually paying 50% less than going through those non-sustainable routes. So that is one of the many values that compostables can bring to the local authorities. Next slide, please. And also, if you look at it, of course, from the industry side, then again, of course, the majority of the brands and all the big retailers in the UK have signed the Plastic Pact and are taking a leadership here, and eventually not only committed to their own values and to the government role, but to what end consumers are now more and more expecting. Next slide, please. So there have been several polls that have looked into UK consumers and what do they think could be the most sustainable packaging solution. And this is just one example out of a few that came out in the past few years. And it just seems that the British consumers get it. They get that some plastics are very, very hard to recycle, or whatever recycling technologies we have today are just not fit for those solutions. And there, if you cannot recycle, how do you go beyond that? And it seems that a lot of consumers are already connecting the dots, in a sense, and realizing that compostables are and should be included as part of the new economy that we're all looking at. Last slide, please. Yeah, so for us, eventually the vision is that if you cannot avoid a package, and if you cannot recycle a package, then possibly compostables have a very important role to play here, with still protecting goods along their supply chains, but end of life are included along food waste collection systems and being returned back to nature and to soil as nutrients. So that concludes my talk for today. Next slide. Thank you very much.
Julia, thank you. That was a great run through of the debate around compostables. I think that it's generated some good questions as well. In terms of timing, I think we've probably got time for, I'll take one or two questions straight to you, because as I say, because I think this section has generated some a number of questions, and then we'll be straight on to Jane at Evergreen, but taking a couple of the points from I think the ones particularly around, I think there's some figures around the compostable bins. I think both Paul Rogan and Jane Lawler had some questions about compostable bins. So Paul was asking about the figures on compost bin access in the UK, because I think he was interested in what the figures you quoted there. And Jane's point is around putting compostables in domestic compost bins. May be a bit of a challenge because you need very high temperatures, and whether domestic compost bins will do that enough. And then if it doesn't, does it then undermine the debate? If you just take those 2 points, Julia, it'd be lovely.
So actually, products are compostable, whether they're industrially compostable or compostable. There's a certification scheme for home composting. So it's not just stating or testing this in our home composter, but there are real certifications in that realm. Not all compostable packaging are home compostable, but a lot of them are. For TIPA in particular, it's a huge focus because we believe that until infrastructure is set across the world to accept compostable packaging as part of the food waste bins, then home composting is at least one effective route. So for us at TIPA in particular, whatever we communicate as a home compostable solution is one that can be actually treated in your garden bin. As far as local authorities, I think as other speakers were mentioning, there are, or in Michael's in specific, there are I think over 300 local authorities in the UK, each making its own decisions. Some are already accepting compostable bin liners, while others are still, need to meet the target. For us, actually, part of the reason why we were so happy to be invited by Recoop for this webinar is because we want to get the message across. Compostables can be so helpful in reducing non-recyclables from other bins, while they're they can be included in the food waste bins. So of course there are challenges, and different players need to take part in that. But I can say specifically for TIPA, we're trying to do quite a lot of work in that area, either with the government point of view, or even starting to work with local authorities, and with separated collection bins for now. So between now and 2025, we've crossed some journey into how those can be accepted into the waste bins.
Julia, thank you. There's some more questions come in. I will take those at the end, if I may, to those who have just put them in. I've seen them all, so all good. But as I say, keen to get Jane in now, and I'm sure that will generate some more questions as well, and then we'll have a good amount of time at the end. So if I can hand over to Jane Hartley from Evergreen Garden Care, and she's going to, I think, over to you, Jane. The floor is yours.
Hello and welcome to Evergreen Garden Care. I'm Jane Hartley and I'm the Sustainability Marketing Manager in the UK. I am currently at the home of our research station, Levington, which is where we trial all of our brands. So Levington, Miracle Grow, Evergreen, just to name a few. So what I wanted, next slide please, and what I wanted to cover off today was the gardener's perception of plastic. So we've got some research that's been done, the retailer's desire to change, and where our biggest challenge falls is in the recycling infrastructure. So I'll, next slide please, I'll talk about gardener's perception next. So it won't be too much of a surprise to us all, having experienced the lockdown for COVID, is that behaviour and habits have certainly changed within the last 6 months when it comes to gardening. We found, as James mentioned earlier, that more people, almost 3 million new people have entered into gardening, which is fantastic because they've enjoyed the experience. And what has also come across is that many more younger generations are now getting involved. Traditionally, our industry has been very much 45 plus, a lot of pensioners out there who've got a lot of time. But what has been really encouraging is that the younger generations are getting involved and they want to continue into the future. But what does that mean in terms of plastics? So next slide, please. So we know from the consumer profiles that we currently have, and we've done a lot of research around this, that of the 5 consumer types that we have specified, 71% of our consumers want to buy sustainable brands. Now, again, as James mentioned earlier, many gardeners are more environmentally conscious than the majority of the general public. So as a gardening company, it's really important that we are very credible when it comes to sustainable brands. But also on top of that, people's attitudes to plastics are changing, and they've, Blue Planet 2 changed our world. And we've had to very much give the very clear rationale as to why we as an industry and as a manufacturer continue to use plastics within our portfolio. So next. So we do, next slide please. So we do have refillable options. So this is one particular product, our lawn care product, which is Miracle Grow Evergreen Complete. And it does have a carton that you can use to refill. What we've not been too good at over the years is we've probably been a bit complacent and not necessarily talked about that on our packaging. So these are certainly things that we want to do. And 80%, our biggest challenge is that 80% of our products are actually in plastic containers, which means that the vast majority of those are single use. Plastics is a great format for us as a business because many of the products are actually stored in damp, cold sheds. And if a product is stored in a cardboard box, over the winter it gets damp and the product inside actually becomes more of an issue from a consumer point of view. So it's really important that we educate people and we are very aware from our consumer care line that a number of customers are asking more and more about refillable options and also about recycling icons as well. So on all of our new products, we are using OPRLs logos, and in the vast majority of instances, it's great to see that people are using that. But we also know that from recent Mintel research on household care packaging, which is very similar to the area that we're in, 77% of people want single-use packaging. They want that to be avoided. And 51% want their packaging to be recycled. So it really do need to ensure that it's very clear on pack. And we've still got a long way to go. But of those, 29% actually want a refillable option. So on to the next slide. Our response is to highlight wherever possible on packs, on website, that we have solutions. So what about our retailers? So many of them are facing challenges. So next, please. We know from a recent presentation from Tesco's that their number one or their number two challenge is that their customers want to see a reduction in plastics. So they've introduced a remove, reduce, reuse and recycle strategy, which is something that we are following. So next. So what have we done? Well, we've removed black plastic bottles. We've obviously talked about it. That was a fairly quick change in terms of we had a bottle that we could move to that still suited that particular product. We've also removed the amount of virgin plastic as well, and we're continuing to do that across our ranges. And our intention is that by 2022, 90% of our products will contain 30% plus recycled plastic. And we've also looked at everything, no stone is unturned within our business. We've reduced the amount of mixed material in bags, which obviously can also equally be difficult. Next. So then we look at reuse. So we know that we need to encourage reuse on compost bags. So what we introduced this year is actually ideas on reusing the bag. So we've got here examples of hanging basket, drainage holes in the bottom, and perhaps using them as something that you can put onto your flower bed. We are, as I say, promoting reusable and refillable products, and we're also developing new labels which are encouraging reuse, repair and recycle. So for some of the products that we currently have, we do have a repair and a parts service for those products. And finally, as I mentioned, we've introduced new on-pack recycling labels on MPD, which makes it simpler for consumers. And we are developing new labels in collaboration with OPRL. So next slide. So with our OPRL, it is really important. What I identified really quickly was that some of the standard labeling that is used in other industries didn't quite fit with our range of products. We had different names for things, etc. So what I have been doing is working really closely with the OPRL team to develop labels that we could actually put onto our packaging that was consistent with the terminology that we were using on our labels. And it is all about collaboration. I mean, that is the really important thing that I want to get across, is if one size doesn't fit all, the industry is definitely very flexible to help support us. And then also, we've started, these are very much first stabs to create our own set of labels where we're actually trying to encourage people to reuse and refill and in some cases repair. So these are things that we're trying to complement the OPRL labels in terms of recycling, but reflect it more closely to what we're trying to do in our industry. Next. And finally, the recycling infrastructure. Well, this is the area where we have our biggest challenges, to be perfectly honest. So if you look at the next slide, you'll see that this is where it's not a pretty picture. So 30% of our products, bearing in mind that 80% of them are in a plastic format, only 30% can actually currently be recycled, which certainly from the consumers that call my helpline is not a very good situation to be in. So that basically means that despite our rigid plastics and our flexible packaging, they can actually be recycled. What this actually means is that generally they're going into landfill or incineration. And the reason that 70% of those packaging items can't be recycled is either due to the technical reasons. So we've been talking from the previous speakers in terms of the issues we have with flexible packaging, but also from our concentrates, it's more around the regulatory reasons. And that's an area that I'll touch in a bit more detail. So next slide. So if we look at, so this was a range of products that we actually launched this year. So what you have here are two bottles. One is a ready to use. So this is something that is pre-diluted. It's in a really easy bottle. And the second bottle on the screen is our concentrate. So obviously it is concentrated solution with our active ingredients. So this year, this particular product had a new active ingredient because it was a ready to use format. It could be recycled, so it goes straight into that recycling bin, and we could use the great green labels. The challenge we have with our concentrates is, although it's the same active ingredient, because of the fact that it is in a concentrate format, the regulations at the moment say that none of it can be recycled. So it has to go, it's red lights flashing here, it has to go down the route of landfill or incineration, which, when we're trying to launch a natural product within our Roundup range, it doesn't fit nicely in terms of the messages that we're trying to communicate. So if you just do a quick click, you'll see that at the moment, the guidelines that are currently based, that we're all following, are based on chemicals that manufacturers no longer sell. So the piece of research that was done by DEFRA and the team was actually done about 10 years ago, and our industry is changing. You know, there are chemicals that we're launching on a regular basis that are different to what we used 10 years ago. So we absolutely need to review the collection rules. So what have we been doing? So next slide, please. Well, we've been doing a lot of talking. We've spoken to many companies within the industry. We've wanted, as a business, to really understand what the challenges are. So we've talked to the industry bodies, we've talked to processing, recycling plants, we've talked to our retailers, we've talked to the industry. And our intention is that we gather all of that information, and we then can sit down with DEFRA and our chemical regulations division that are part of Health and Safety Executive to really see if we can try and review those rules and make it simpler for the consumers. And what that will actually mean, if we do another click, is that once we've reviewed those rules through the amount of information that we've collated, we can then start to educate consumers as to the best way of dealing with our concentrate packaging, but also the industry's concentrate packaging. So, you know, we'll use the likes of Recoup, the OpenRA labels, you know, all of the different recycling people that are more on the front line talking to consumers. Okay, so next slide. Okay, so our biggest challenge is if you think back to 70% of our range can't be recycled, and one of probably the most sought after items within gardening over the lockdown was, could anyone find a compost bag? Well, when they eventually did have the garden centres opening and they go into a compost yard, what you will find is that we are knee deep in flexible plastic, which is not the best position to be. It's a fantastic format. It is recyclable, and we've really reduced the amount of mixed materials in these bags, and we've done a lot of work to make sure that it can be recyclable. But when the infrastructure isn't there to do it, it does mean that we actually need to rethink and reconsider things. So I had hoped to be able to talk to you about an initiative, but it's still not quite ready to share with you. So what I will say, if we can click here, is that please do watch this space. We have rethinked and we have redesigned and rethought about this whole area, and it's a case of hopefully you will see something coming very soon. So on that note, I hope I did that in 15 minutes. Thank you very much for listening.
Very good, Jane. Thank you. Yes, spot on. Well done. Very good. Thank you. No, that was really good. I think, and now, so we've all kept time rather well. We've got time for some questions. We've got, there's some that are sort of quite, some are sort of comments and some are quite particular to particular speakers. So I think from the top, I think, so from some of the early ones. Paul Rogan was asking a question to Michael about the polymers that sort of they use, and particularly the PCR ones he asks about. So, Michael, I wonder whether you can pick that one up.
Yes, for sure. First of all, thanks for the question. I'm happy to answer it. Yeah, the polymers which we currently use is predominantly polypropylene and polystyrene, and PCR just means post-consumer recycled material. So we currently have two sources. One is the source from the household waste. So we're sourcing material from German's yellow bag. That's in combination with Der Grüne Punkt, German's biggest association for reprocessing raw materials. And secondly, it's typical standard post-consumer material. So post-consumer material means plastic that has already used in its original purpose, like garden chairs, which can be used for the production. And the other one is even the household waste that's collected by garbage collectors directly from your households, and that's predominantly polypropylene and polystyrene. I hope that this was the right answer on your question.
Thank you, Michael. So Paul may come back on that, but I will move on to some others. But thank you for picking that one up. There was a couple from so just going down in the order. A couple from James Raffoni. There was one, I think it was a comment really about I think putting plastic in a bit of context, and I think a lot of the sort of media, sort of public narrative sometimes is about a war on plastic, and I think the point James makes is around that a bit of context is exactly what we're talking about here. I think it's a bit more about some of those very difficult to recycle plastics and single-use plastics is really what we should be talking about, and less about plastics overall. And I know some of the speakers have picked up on that point a bit later on as well. He also puts a question to me as the chair. So James, thank you for that. He asks about whether the HCA are using the UK Plastic Pact as a central point of reference for guidance. So again, that was something referenced by some earlier speakers, the UK Plastics Pact. As for the HCA, we are reviewing all our sustainability policies at the moment, and we will be launching a sustainability roadmap later this year. And plastics is going to be one of those areas we look at, and it's about setting those some targets and some ambitions across the sector. It's you know, what we announced later this year is the start of the process. It's a 3-5 year program, and you know, the mechanic of the UK Plastics Pack is an interesting one, and is a one which, you know, I think we are looking at. I don't want to say too much more at the moment on that, because I think, as I say, we're still reviewing all of that, and I don't want to spoil the our sustainability roadmap announcement later on this year. But point taken, James, and I think, as I say, that's part of that debate around plastics in horticulture. On sort of going down some of the questions, I think we had one from Catherine E, who was asking about the question around local authorities not taking plant pots, and this stat that was, I think, Michael referenced, and I know Jane was talking about sort of lack of collections by plant pots by local authorities as well. So the stat of 90% local authorities not taking plant pots. So Catherine E asks about why is this when they can be recycled in the horticultural industry? She says we have at least 2 processes that take them in the UK. Is it due to the sorting required when the curbside collections are delivered back to site? That feels a bit like one for John. Yes, please. Yeah, John, that'd be great.
It very simply, it's a volume thing, and then it's a size and you know, colour and all the rest of it that we've all talked about. So, you know, it's the fact that historically there haven't been, you know, large numbers. There are very large numbers, but in the context of everything else, you've got, you know, billions of plastic bottles coming through and so on. So it's very much about that sorting requirement at the curbside. I'd really urge anyone who's not seen a recycling facility at full tilt, definitely go and see it. Apart from being fascinating, it's also shocking. I just want to make one other point as well. Jane brilliantly talked about you know, reuse and refills, which I'm a massive fan of. It's fiddly and it's less convenient and all those things, but only judged by, you know, the sort of uber convenience, which I wrote a report on for CIWM a couple of years ago. The uber convenience of everything being single-use packaged, and we really need to remember that there was a time when you didn't have it and refilled stuff, and I'm not talking about going back to living in caves, although there's probably some benefits to that too. But B, you know, recycling is number 3 on the hierarchy. If you think about the waste hierarchy, you've got reduce, reuse, recycle, and then recover energy and whatever. So that there's a lot more focus needs to be put on that top end, which is exactly what Jane was talking about, whether it's concentrates that are also in refills, or whatever. It's double whammy there. You know, that concentrate with a refill is a huge benefit. We do dig your own on the soil improver at Water Beach, one of our facilities. No packaging involved in that. Get fit too. It's one of the main outcomes of gardening, right? So you know, there's lots of different ways of engaging with consumers and stakeholders, but we must remember that recycling isn't the solution, and it's not like toss it in a bin and forget about it. There's actually a huge number of steps, technology, investment, energy. One of the points that James Buffoni was making, you know, that sort of the overall impact of an activity. Actually, if you can avoid, as long as it's not a perishable good, if you can really reduce and avoid that packaging, you're delivering benefits in spades, literally. So we've got to keep an eye on that. Just one other one that Catherine mentioned in terms of bags. So when a bag is a large piece of film, basically goes through a recycling plant, what it tends to do is mask the other things that are in it or underneath it. So large volumes of plastic going through a recycling facility mean that you miss all the valuable materials that are underneath it, metals, plastic bottles, whatever. So that's why big plastic film sheets are really difficult in a recycling facility environment. I did want to also pick up on the biodegradability point and commercial composting and AD, if I can do that very briefly.
Yeah, I think just on that, John, but also I think on the composting bit as well for Julia as well. I think if that question's appropriate for her as well.
Sure.
Good.
So just very briefly, yes, you reach temperatures in commercial composting and digestion processes. By definition, you know, animal byproducts regulations and so on, you must, if you're handling on animal byproducts materials, or in terms of weed and pathogen kill in a green waste environment. But the retention time isn't that long, because, you know, tomorrow another bunch of stuff arrives, and you know, it's a process with an outcome, as opposed to the perfect organic management system, if you like. So yes, temperatures are achieved, but the retention time is minimum, really. It's not, you know, it's not 3-6 months till you get full degradation. So yes, there's certification, and Julia talked about that, but there's actually also the practicalities of the retention time. So, you know, you're looking at typically 6 to 12 weeks, 7 to 10 weeks for a process, and obviously digestion is 2 weeks normally in one part of the process, and then maturation. So, you know, it's actually a retention time issue, a length of time issue, and the demands of collecting or processing materials being delivered to you, and the space you need to store for a given period of time.
Thanks, John. Julia, is any further? I know you sort of answered some of that earlier about the sort of home composting. But is there anything further you wanted to put to that, I suppose, in sort of response to John's point, really?
Yeah, sure. And John is actually pointing out concern by many compost facilities in terms of, again, accepting compostables. There are a number of studies published on how compostables actually perform in compost facilities. One just recently, just released 2 or 3 months ago, where actually a plant pot made from PLA was decomposed within 11 days. And I think also one of the most common practices in compost facilities is that you actually recirculate back, because even organic matter doesn't necessarily finish the cycle within 11 days. The second part of it is the quality of compost. Sometimes compost facilities actually need the time, and forget about compostable packaging for the food waste and whatever is still there, to make a good quality compost. A lot of the times farmers in other countries would not even want to take the compost because of the not excellent quality that it has. You can look at Italy, for example, where there are norms about the quality of the compost. And Italy is actually a country where bin liners need to be compostables for the food waste bin, and it's working perfectly well, 2% max of plastic contamination, and no problem with processing those compostable bags within the relevant time frame for composters. So again, there's a lot of education that our industry has to do, and a lot of communication to ease the fears or the non-knowledge that a lot of times composting facilities do not yet have, and you can of course understand that.
Thanks, Julia. I think we'll stay with Julia, actually. There's another question on compostables, and so just going down the list as they were asked, from Liz Williams. And she asks, I think particularly, because I know you spoke quite broadly about compostable and compostable packaging, and I think Liz's questions is around very specifically in the horticulture industry. So where do you see compostable plastic packaging fitting into the horticulture industry? So things like consumer-facing plant tags and seed packages, things like that.
Yeah, well, we have to be very particular. I mean, compostable packaging for TPAP, but as a whole as an industry, sometimes we can completely replace, like the conical bags, for example, that we sell quite well in Europe. That are very, well transformed into a compostable. Sometimes, mediums like seeds that need a very long shelf life, for example, would not fit. So it's not that our industry at this point in time can offer solutions for all. We have to be very, very particular. But for sure, there's a good range of what TPA in particular, the industry as a whole, can offer to this industry, which is something that needs to be said.
Okay, thanks, Julia. All right. I think Liz heard all that. I think there's a question from Catherine E. again, very prolific in the questions. And I think it's around peat compost bags for recycling from businesses. Are they not taken for recycling due to the small quantities from households? So I suppose there's a bit of a question. I think maybe if I've understood Catherine's question right, but also my sort of take on it slightly is one for Jane really, and it's around that sort of systems of companies taking back packaging. It's that those take back schemes, and with that work for things like compost bags.
Yeah. So good question, and one that we're really looking at. The challenge is, I mean, obviously we've heard about all of the challenges at Kerbside anyway, and that people aren't recycling enough. So we are looking and working with retailers to actually see if we can do collection schemes. So it is something that we're very aware of, and it is. I think it's basically it's watch this space. I also noted, Catherine, that you made another question in terms of triple rinse. That does continue to be on back of pack, but my preference is that we make it simple, because triple rinse in agricultural, you've got waste areas within your gardens where you can get rid of your wastewater. We specifically say you cannot put the product down drains. So then the customer is saying, well, where the hell do I put it? Sorry, I swirl. So it's, what I want to try and do is go back to the basics, look at what is driving those decisions, review the chemicals that we're using and that were part of the research that was done 10 years ago, and come up with a simpler solution that is better suited for the consumer and the home garden environment. Hopefully I've answered your questions there.
Yes, no, it's and again, these things aren't simple, are they? That's the thing, and it's often interpreting how consumers see it. So it's not necessarily sometimes as businesses how we see it. It's often how consumers interpret it and then act on it, and that, I think, is the real sort of holy grail, I think, sometimes in these things. But thank you. Yeah, it's really good. Any other questions? I think those are the questions we've come through on now. I think, is there anything to come back on? Anything you've heard? People on the webinar that you've heard from our four speakers today? No. Okay. No, just seeing if anything's coming through from anyone. But I think, yeah, good range of questions there to the panel. I suppose to sum up, I think, from the discussion, the debate we've had today, I suppose from the four speakers, I suppose sum up in sort of 30 seconds. What would you say is the sort of going forward? Is the one thing that as an industry, sort of as a horticulture industry, as a waste management industry, as packaging industry, what do we really need to focus on collectively? How do we come together? I think sometimes on some of these things. It's quite a difficult. Maybe that's a difficult question, but I think just in a bit of a summary, how do we bring all this together a bit? Jane, sort of start with you, sort of at the top of the screen there.
Yeah, so I mean, I mentioned in my presentation about collaboration and working with the industry, and I think what we found when we started talking to all of the different sectors within the industry is that some of the challenges that we are facing, we feel and we believe can be overcome, but it's only through talking and working with the industry and with people like Recoup, who can kind of put us into contact with the right people, that we've actually started to be able to move what feels like an incredibly huge mountain to hopefully something that is achievable and can be seen by our consumers that we're going down in the right direction.
Yeah, thanks, Jane. John.
Yeah, for me, I think we're all custodians of the planet, and particularly none more so than gardeners and those involved with horticulture. And I think it's genuinely clearly in our interest to ensure that we use plastics in a responsible way, so that they don't end up in the wrong place at the wrong time, whether that's an ocean or a back garden or a compost heap. Plastic has been demonized by many. One of the points in questions kind of made that eloquently. I don't think any of us, probably speaker-wise, are against plastic. It's just making sure that things are used for the right purpose, in the right way, at the right time, and that there's a plan at the end. There's a plan, and I think the bit that probably has been missing is that plan, and making sure, and Jane mentioned that as well, that the infrastructure, Michael referenced it, the infrastructure is there to recycle this material, so that we don't just say it's recyclable without, it's kind of like an empty promise in many ways. And the practicalities of what we're making and using, and how we're making it and using it, and the consequences of that. Favourite phrase of mine is, for every action there's an equal and opposite reaction. Linked closely to matter can neither be created nor destroyed. So when you make a decision or make a choice, there is a consequence. It doesn't mean that they're insurmountable, and it does absolutely mean that we can come up with solutions, but it really needs a very strong responsibility lead from those that are in control, and they tend to be manufacturers and retailers. So the consumer is key, but will only act in ways that they're provided information on that makes sense.
Thanks, John. Okay, yes, Michael, just quick final summary from you, and then to Julia.
Yes, thanks. Yeah, as a short summary, as I said earlier, I would like to base it on 3 steps. Since we all know about the challenges now, and I'm pretty sure that every participant of the supply chain knows where exactly it is and where the challenges are. Based on 3 steps, the first step is, in my eyes, definitely the communication. We need to communicate, and by saying communication, I also mean education, being transparent, honest, and definitely stay behind what you say. The second one is definitely the collaboration. So what we all need is a collaborative approach with mutual responsibility. All sitting in the same boat means that we all need to work together, which in my eyes worked very well today. I mean, most of and all the speakers today more or less had and aimed at the same direction. And the last one, which Jane has mentioned earlier, in my eyes, is the infrastructure. And there we need to set the framework, but not say that somebody is only guilty for that. We all are responsible for that, and we all need to set the framework together. And that's my final claim to everybody. Let's do it together and not just set the responsibility to 1 or 2 persons of the supply chain.
Thanks, Michael. Very succinct call to action there. Thank you. Julia.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, 3 things for me also. I think we first have to maximize everything that we can. If we can avoid packaging, let's do that. If we can recycle more than we are today, let's do that. If we can reuse as much as possible, let's do that. Second is acknowledge that there are some limitations to plastic recycling. Mechanical recycling can only handle certain products, like I've mentioned, like John mentioned. And we have to acknowledge those. And once we've acknowledged that, then we have to leave room and open ourselves to thinking beyond plastic and what else could be done to chip into this plastic situation we're facing. And for all these other solutions like compostables that could be integrated with existing but other collection systems, etc., then work with all stakeholders, because of course, as everybody said, it's just not one entity effort that can change the game for us and the way we operate as humanity. So all of these things together can eventually, hopefully, can bring us to a brighter future when we talk about recycling plastic.
Great, thanks, Julia. That's a nice way to end a sort of brighter future for everyone. I think that's nicely put. I think there's one of the points, I think, just to add to that as well, is actually the role of government in this, because I think as industry, I think, as Jane was saying, there's an opportunity, Mike was saying, come together on this and have a, make sure we continue to keep discussing these things, but there's also the role of legislation and government in all of this as well. They need to actually be part of this, but it's a mixture of, sort of those underpinning, but also legislation can sometimes help shape the debate as well, but shaping it in the right way. So thank you again to our 4 speakers today. I think I thoroughly enjoyed it. I hope everyone else found that really fascinating and interesting. Stuart, I don't know if you want to pass back to you just for a minute, just to do the final close as the host.
Thanks, James. Yeah, I don't think there's much to add. I hope the delegates found it interesting, but certainly we as Recoup learn a lot from these as well, and hopefully that helps us to shape the work we're doing and the help we give our members and the kind of core activities we take on moving forward. So just from me, thank you very much, James, to you for sharing, and to all the speakers. As mentioned at the start, we'll make sure we get a recording and the slides sent around, and if anyone is interested in speaking more to Recoup about membership support, the work we do, please contact us, and there's plenty of information on the website as well if you want to look into that. So thank you again, and hopefully we'll see you again at one of our future webinars. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye-bye.